What if I told you that the United States was just moments away from striking Iran, and someone quietly stopped it? Not Congress, not the United Nations, not even America's closest allies in Europe. Instead, it was a group of countries most people never think about as global power brokers. The Gulf states. Behind closed doors, away from cameras and headlines, a few Gulf nations stepped in and changed the course of history. No explosions, no public speeches, no breaking news alerts. But their actions may have prevented a full-scale war in the Middle East, and here's the shocking part. Most people have no idea this even happened. In this video, I'm going to reveal three things. First, how close the United States really was to launching a strike on Iran. Second, why the Gulf powers were more worried than anyone else. And third, how quiet phone calls and private warnings stopped missiles before they were fired. This isn't a conspiracy story. This is about diplomacy, fear, money, and survival. Because sometimes the most powerful moves in world politics happen in silence. And once you understand what really happened here, you'll never look at the Middle East the same way again. So let me show you exactly how this happened. To understand why this moment mattered so much, we need to step back for a second. The relationship between the United States and Iran has been tense for decades. Sanctions, threats, military standoffs, and proxy conflicts have shaped their history. By the time this crisis unfolded, tensions were already high. Iran was under heavy economic pressure. The US had troops across the region, and the Middle East was already dealing with wars in multiple countries. One wrong move could have turned everything upside down. At the center of this tension was a simple fear. If the US attacked Iran, Iran would not fight alone. It could respond through allies, militias, cyber attacks, or by blocking key shipping routes. That would pull many countries into the conflict, whether they wanted to be involved or not. And that's where the Gulf states come in. Countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Oman sit right next to Iran. They share borders, waterways, airspace, and trade routes. They may not always agree with Iran politically, but they know one thing very clearly. If a war breaks out, they will be on the front line. Here's something many people don't realize. A huge portion of the world's oil passes through a narrow waterway called the Strait of Hormuz. It's one of the most important trade routes on Earth. If that strait is blocked, oil prices skyrocket, global markets panic. Every country feels it, at the gas pump, in food prices, and in the economy. The Gulf states understood this risk better than anyone else. And while the world was watching headlines and speeches, these countries were preparing for the worst. But instead of choosing sides publicly, they chose a different path. That they picked quiet diplomacy. And this is where things start getting really interesting. Here's the first big truth. When the United States considered military action against Iran, it wasn't just a political decision. It was a calculation filled with unknowns. Military planners could map targets. They could estimate damage. They could prepare responses. But what they couldn't fully control was how Iran would react. And the Gulf states knew this too. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Oman began sending a clear message behind the scenes. Not through press conferences, not through social media, but through private channels. They warned Washington that a strike on Iran would not stay limited. It would spill across borders. Missiles could cross airspace, shipping lanes could shut down, oil facilities could become targets. For Gulf countries, this wasn't theory. It was reality. Their cities, ports, and energy infrastructure sit dangerously close to potential conflict zones. A single escalation could threaten their economies overnight. And remember, many of these countries had spent years trying to stabilize their region. They had invested in diplomacy, trade, and internal reforms. A sudden war would undo all of that. One Gulf official reportedly described the situation like this: "Even if the war is not aimed at us, it will hit us first." That message landed hard. Because it reframed the issue. This wasn't just about the US and Iran anymore, it was about regional collapse. And that forced decision makers to pause. But if you think that alone stopped the strike, wait until you hear what came next. The second revelation is about how influence really works in global politics. Power is not always loud. Sometimes it's calm, patient, and very strategic. Gulf states like Qatar and Oman have long played a unique role in the Middle East. They are not the loudest voices. They don't always take extreme public positions. Instead, they act as connectors. If they talk to everyone at the US, Iran, other Gulf countries, global powers, that gives them something incredibly valuable: trust. During this crisis, that trust became critical. These countries helped pass messages. They clarified intentions, they reduced misunderstandings. Think about that for a moment. In a situation where one wrong assumption could lead to war, someone was making sure messages were delivered accurately. This kind of diplomacy doesn't make headlines, but it prevents disasters. Experts often call this back-channel diplomacy. It happens away from cameras. There are no official statements, just conversations. And according to multiple reports, these conversations helped lower the temperature. They reminded Washington that an attack could unite Iran's population instead of weakening it. They reminded Tehran that escalation would harm its neighbors, not just its enemies. And they reminded everyone that once war starts, no one controls how it ends. This layered pressure, economic risk, regional instability, and diplomatic warnings built up. Slowly, the idea of an immediate strike became less attractive, but the most shocking discovery was still ahead. Here is the moment that changes everything. The decision not to strike Iran wasn't just about avoiding damage, it was about preventing a chain reaction. Military experts feared that even a limited strike could trigger responses across the region. Attacks on US bases, cyber attacks on infrastructure, disruptions to shipping, retaliation through proxy groups. The Gulf states laid this out clearly. They weren't defending Iran, they were defending stability. And that distinction mattered. This wasn't about taking sides, it was about survival. The Gulf powers made it clear, if the region burns, everyone loses. And that message aligned with another hard truth. The global economy was already fragile, energy markets were sensitive, inflation was a concern worldwide. A regional war could have triggered a global crisis. Suddenly, the cost of action looked far greater than the cost of restraint. And so quietly, the moment passed. No strike, no war. Most people never noticed. But history took a different path. So what does all this mean for us today? First, it shows that middle powers matter. You don't need to be the biggest military force to influence world events. You need positioning, credibility, and timing. Second, it shows that diplomacy still works, even in a world that feels increasingly divided. Not every problem is solved with force. Some are solved with patience. Third, it reminds us that global stability is fragile. Decisions made in private rooms can affect gas prices, food costs, and security thousands of miles away. For everyday people, this matters more than we realize. A war avoided means fewer refugees, more stable economies, lower risk of global shocks. And finally, this moment reveals something deeper. Power today is not just about weapons, it's about influence, relationships, and understanding consequences. The Gulf states understood that, and they acted when it mattered most. Remember the question we started with: who stopped America's Iran strike? The answer is not one country, not one leader. It was a quiet coalition of Gulf powers acting out of self-interest, responsibility, and fear of chaos. They didn't do it loudly, they didn't take credit, but their actions may have saved the region from a devastating war. And that is the final truth. Sometimes, the most important moments in history happen when nothing happens at all. No explosions, no speeches, just a decision not to pull the trigger, and now you know the story behind it.